Good morning. I said this event a year ago was just an idea, like everything in life. It started with an idea, and then it took the leadership. I want to recognize here His Excellency, the President Kagame, for his leadership and drive, which made today possible. So really, thank you to him and to the Rwanda authorities for their belief in this project and in this vision. What we wanted to do, and before I get into that, I'll do a second thank you. A thank you to all of you for showing up. You know the quote, a lot of success is just showing up. So we appreciate that you're here. We have a proverb in the Ivory Coast, which is my country of origin, and I translate it as saying that the feet and the heart always travel together. So when somebody tells you, yes, it's your daughter's wedding, my heart is with you, but I cannot make it, that's what you answer. The feet and the heart are always by design in the same place. So thank you for being here. It's a pleasure to see your commitment to this and to FinTech. What we wanted to do is really to have a special event for a dialogue between entrepreneurs, regulators, policymakers, the media even, to really accelerate the growth of FinTech for the benefit of African consumers and African economies. So I'm going to refer to this from time to time because my children have told me, Daddy, never use paper anymore. You're not credible. So they all speak from their phones when they have to give a speech. So I'm trying to adjust. It is my belief that with FinTech we have the potential to develop and grow very successful companies in Africa. I did a simple thing. Yesterday I looked at the top 10 companies by market cap in the world. Okay? It moves a lot, but the list right now is, let me go, I think it's Microsoft, Apple, Alphabet, Google, Amazon, Facebook, Tesla, Nvidia, Berkshire Hathaway, the Taiwan semiconductor company, manufacturing company TSMC, Saudi Aramco, and Meta. So it's a very interesting list because the first thing that strikes me is that 8 of the 10 were created after 1970, which is in itself, when you think about it, an amazing statistic. 8 of the 10 largest companies in the world are about 50 years old, which in corporate life is not that long. And 5 of the 10 were created after 1990. And I think a number of you in the room were either being born or just born at that time. And it's simply amazing when you think about it. It's never happened before in the history of the world that such young companies have been this dominant. So what does it mean? For me, it means that the number one driver of value and growth in the world is innovation. And that was in the slides before. It's not raw materials, it's not natural endowment, it's intellectual capital. It's innovation, it's soft power that drives the world. But actually that's good news, because that's where we're the most equal as Africans, okay? Because we have the brains. Okay? I do believe that brain power is equally allocated on the planet. I do believe that every child that comes to the world is endowed with a great potential. What lacks is the opportunity, often, and the means to capture the opportunity. So I think that the combination of innovation, capital, and smart policy and regulation, I kind of intuitively agree with the slide that was showed earlier. You know? It's innovation, it's capital, it's policy, it's regulation. That drives growth. And I think that in this battle, we have a place and a role to play. Now, Nick has told me that you give me about 10 minutes max, so I'm going to compact my remarks, knowing that a lot of the key points will be made by other speakers. We have the 2 governors speaking later, so I'm not going to belabor the points. But I also do believe, and I've said this to many African heads of state, that there is a drive to attract foreign investment, but it is my firm belief that if you want foreign investment, you need to develop a good domestic environment and to allow domestic companies to grow and do well. And that is an absolutely necessary condition to success, because nobody will invest in a country if the companies that are native, led by people who are born there, speak the language, know everybody, cannot succeed. I really tell all the heads of state, spend 80% of your time with your domestic companies. The rest will follow. Often we invert that logic. Okay? I've run Fortune 500 companies. The first question I would ask about going, I drove Prudential into Myanmar, for instance. I say, okay, who are the local players? How well are they doing? That's really the 101. You start there. Okay? And if they're struggling, you say, what are my chances of success in an environment that I don't know if the locals can't succeed? So really, this drive to make sure that you have national companies that do well is absolutely indispensable. And I insist on SMEs. The reason I like the huge companies is that they all started small. Jeff Bezos created Amazon. Bill Gates created Microsoft. I don't know a single large company in the world that was not created by one or two entrepreneurs in a garage or sitting around a table. So if you want, your ambition is to have huge companies, you should work very hard to have a lot of small companies, which is counterintuitive, but absolutely key. Okay? I was in France the other day talking, Mr. Renault, he started Renault with his brother in a little garage in Boulogne-Billancourt. You can trace back every company, whether it's Asia, every part of the world, to this drive, this entrepreneurial drive. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm excited to meet you, because the room is full of entrepreneurs, and I think you hold the key to the development of Africa and its success. And I often say, even to ministers of finance, if you want fiscal balance, you need people to create value so they can pay taxes. It's such a simple observation. But you should really work very hard to have profitable companies, because those profits will be what's going to build the roads, the schools, the hospitals that you dream of. And that's a much better source than foreign borrowing. Endogenous, self-sustainable, inclusive growth. Maybe a few more comments on inclusion. Very good statistics on Africa, mobile telephony, and one of the things maybe not known of my career, but I'm really kind of proud of, is that I introduced the first free mobile licenses in the Ivory Coast in 1995, and I had to fight. We were, so 6 months, blocked with the World Bank, who simply did not believe that mobile could succeed in Africa. I know, but I'm old enough or young enough to have lived through that. And we had to fight to get those free licenses. And the logic was, well, people are illiterate in Africa, so they'll never use phones, mobile phones. To which I always answer, yes, but every literate person knows at least one literate person. That is good enough. They'll go and say, son, can you put this phone number in my phone? And they'll know how to press number 1 to get their son. Anyway, the rest is history, but I think it's Napoleon who said, defeat is an orphan and victory has many fathers. So it's very interesting to see how many people believed in the mobile in Africa and so on. So we're a bit in the same position today. Don't get discouraged by the skeptics. Don't get discouraged by the skeptics. In 1995 in Côte d'Ivoire, if we had said, okay, fine, it's not going to work, what would we have today? Okay? So I really rely on you in this room not to get discouraged by the skeptics. Often, the more skepticism you encounter, the more likely you're to create value ultimately. And you will see that the smart money finds its way to those types of entrepreneurs and those types of ideas. I'm really amazed. If you take Silicon Valley, I'm involved in buying a company there right now. It's amazing to see how many Silicon Valley entrepreneurs are investing in Africa. There are a number of names earlier. I can add Jim Breyer. Jim is the original investor in Facebook. He has 15 investments in Africa. And most of the leading thinkers in Silicon Valley are today, it's what I call the smart money, investing in Africa. So I think, believe in yourselves, the future is great. And my final comment was that I took my first trip to Asia in 1984. Many of you were not born, mainland China and all of Asia, and I came back really absolutely excited. I genuinely think that this is where we are today in Africa. We are at the onset of a period of amazing growth. I absolutely believe that. In the 80s, the 90s, when you stood up to talk about Africa, let's say in Europe, it was actually interesting to see Europe is not really playing a big role in that chart that you showed, where the capital is coming from. People would just listen politely, and the comeback was, listen, the GDP of sub-Saharan Africa is less than the GDP of Belgium. And I have nothing against Belgium, but it's a comment I heard so many times, but it was irritating in the end, because it was true. Kind of $600, $700 billion. But today, the GDP of Africa would make it a G7 nation. And I'm sorry, with respect, the GDP of Belgium is still 700 billion. And our final statistic, in 1905, Argentina and the US, you can go check, had the same GDP. People who read the GDP, they're looking at the mirror, rear view mirror. It's momentum and growth that matters, okay? So people in 1905 who bet on Argentina against the US, they didn't do so well, you know? Because you saw what happened to the US GDP. The same transformation is happening in Africa. I think we're lucky to be Africans. We're lucky to be in Africa, and we're lucky to be faced with this opportunity. And I want to end, I said it's the third time I'm trying to end, so this time we're going to end, with thanking Singapore and Elevandi, and again, Ravi, without whom none of this would have happened, and they don't know this. But I can reveal that I met President Kagame for the first time in 2010 in Singapore. So final point about this meeting, there is tangible capital, cash, computers, physical property. I personally believe in intangible capital. I think that most of the value comes from intangible capital. And in intangible capital, I put connections, relationships, sure I mentioned President Kagame in Singapore, and the conversations you can have around this event. So I really hope that you can use the next 3 days to make the most of those opportunities, to connect with other people who are going to challenge you, people who are going to make you think differently, people who are going to make you reflect, self-criticism, and so on and so forth. This is where the value is. This is why we wanted to organize this meeting, and I hope that in a few years you'll look back and think that it was time well spent to travel all the way to Kigali. And it's my hope and my belief that those 10 companies I mentioned at the beginning, the transformation in Asia, I think 21st century will see that transformation again in Africa, and I hope that at least one, if not more of you, will be in that list of top 10 when somebody does the same thing in 40 years from now. So thank you for your attention. Have a very good conference. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tidjane. Didn't I tell you?
Hi, my name is Mike. I'm came from the US. So really pleasure to be here. And I'm a startup founder. I think I would be your ideal candidate. Can you talk about some of the regulatory framework to encourage startup founders in the FinTech space to come to Kigali and invest and work? Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, no, thank you. It's an important point, and I'm thinking Nick here, you should know him, because he's the head of Kigali International Financial Center. But I think Rwanda has really focused on the right things. I had limited time, so I couldn't cover all that, but it's talent. You do need to have local talent of quality, and Rwanda has been investing in developing its youth. You need the really ease of setting up a business. And I'm going to look at Nick here, but I'm told that now it takes a maximum of 2 days. So I was going to put that in my notes, and I asked him this morning. He said 2,754.
Amazing. Wow.
And growing, and he had to close it down. So 6 hours to set up a new company. That's really, really important. And there's also a regulatory sandbox, led by the Governor of Central Bank and Ministry of Finance to make sure that everything is streamlined. And you also have, in the last 2 years, 19 laws passed by the Parliament, the leadership of President Kagame, to make sure that your tax and compliance are at world standard. Because the idea is not to attract all the skills or talent that wants to be hidden. The goal is to develop a clean, really world standard financial center, because that's really the way of the future.
Yes.
Thank you.
Do we have time for more questions?
Yeah.
There's a couple of hands up.
Okay.
Gentleman over there, I believe, or is that? Yes.
Thank you. My name is Patrick Conte, the CEO for African FinTech Network. Two questions quickly. Innovation and capital. What we see as African FinTech Network is hubs of innovation, i.e. the Nigerian, South Africa, Kenya, a bit of in Morocco, North Africa.
Egypt.
Question is, Egypt, yeah. What other countries need to do differently? Number one. Number two.
Sorry, what? Sorry, I missed
What
something.
the other countries, what do they need to do differently to ensure the innovation is spread across the continent? Because it's now in selected hubs in Africa. What should the rest of other countries do? Number two is the issue of capital. One of the slides show, indeed, most of capital within Africa is at the seed stage. Substantial portion are overseas money coming in to sustain growth. What has to be done differently? Most of the unicorns in Africa are propelled or financed by funding coming from overseas. What do we need to do differently? Because funding is coming from overseas means those dividends and profits goes overseas.
Okay, thank you. I hope you all heard the question. I'm going to start with the second one. That's something close to my heart. I always tell policymakers, and it's not just because I run Prudential, but a life insurance industry is key. People tend to think about banks first. Banks are not natural providers of equity capital. What is needed for business growth is equity capital, not lending. Okay? Prudential was created in 18, and that's much easier for insurance companies to do than for banks. Prudential was created in 1848, and what it did is really channel the monthly savings of little British workers into long-term investment in railroads, in ports, in canals, in long-term cash-generative infrastructure assets. I'll give you one example. You know, for those who've been to Abidjan, there is a toll bridge, the third bridge, and I was one of the designers of that project, and I wanted to close the funding. I went to the Army Pension Fund. Okay? It's the Army Pension Fund who provide the last 15 billion CFA of equity that allowed the closing of a project. And I said, look, you want to pay the pensions of the soldiers, you need long-term cash-generative infrastructure asset. It's a perfect asset liability match for you. You should invest. So, to cut a long story short, developing local capital markets in local currency. In 2015, I said, I think at the FT Africa Summit, that I thought it was improvement for many African countries to borrow in hard currency, because interest rates wouldn't stay low forever, and I was really lambasted. I think today that comment looks correct. You need to rely on not only, but also on a domestic capital market with depth, and really, especially with a young demography. This was my argument in Indonesia and countries like that. You should absolutely develop pension plans and pension funds, because it's the right part of a demographic transition where you can really accumulate a lot of savings and then invest them productively. The first question was, what should other countries do? I'd say, what do the English say? Imitation is the most accomplished form of flattery. You know, they need to look at the countries that do well and try to do the same thing. And emulation and competition is the main driver of innovation. One last one, if you allow me, or not? One last one. Yeah. Good morning.
My name is Amor. The mic is it? Yes. Good morning, Morakose. My name is Amor Maclang from the One ASEAN FinTech Movement in Digital Pilipinas. Last week, we had a meeting with the UK Prime Minister, who was aggressively courting the ASEAN region when it comes to digital economies. I would like, given the fact that the Indo-Pacific region will be representing close to 40% of the global GDP come 2030, may I ask what's the position, not just of Rwanda, but I think of the Pan-African region when it comes to engaging the ASEAN region overall? Thank you.
Thank you. Look, I'm a great believer in ASEAN. I agree with statistics. When I run businesses, I always invested in the region. It's back to my previous comment. I think a lot of what we do, thank God, a lot of information is available, is looking at what's been done in the Asian countries and try to copy what can be copied in Africa. And just having events like this, I think as a Africa, Asia, and again, thanks to Singapore event, it's exemplary. And we need to have more of these, because there's another Ivory Coast proverb. We say, it's sometimes they're hard to translate, but we say it's the hand that washes the hand. It means you cannot wash one hand. You know, you need two hands to wash your hands. So it's a proverb I love, but it's to say that it's a cooperation, working together is the way forward. And I think that among the African leaders, there is a realization of that, a recognition of the Asian success, and that this South-South dialogue is very, very productive. And I actually think on the ground, there is also already a lot going on at the company level and policy level, and hopefully more will come. So thank you for your patience, your attention.
Thank you. Tidjane, Thiam.